This podcast may contain explicit language. You still think it's beautiful to die for your country? The first bombardment taught us better. When it comes to dying for country, it's better not to die at all. All Quiet on the Western Front is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses the unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And we did get yet another TikTok comment about you being Patton Oswalt this week.
That figures.
Yeah. I mean, again,
charging him for image and likeness violations.
Shouldn't it be the other way around when he's got the more famous likeness?
I don't know. Did he license it?
Well, that's possible. I don't know. You could look into that. You do know some copyright and such.
Yeah.
Well, we are here tonight for our 275th episode, and as most people in our audience know, every time we hit one of the 25 markers on the show, we like to discuss one of what I consider the bigger movies. I think one of the lone exceptions to that rule has been Rio Bravo, which was more of a personal favorite for the two of us. But given the download numbers, both on the audio version of that particular episode, as well as when we finally went on YouTube, and I think that has like 25,000 views to it, because I think people were searching for the actual movie and then came to listen to our podcast. No idea why. It's by far, run away, the number one hit we have on YouTube. But yeah. So All Quiet on the Western Front is this evening from 1930, celebrating its 95th anniversary this year. Directed by Lewis Milestone, written by Maxwell Anderson, George Abbott, and Del Andrews. Cinematography by Arthur Edeson. Music by David Brockman. Although, given the lack of a score in this movie, what exactly did he contribute? Is it like the opening and closing credits, essentially?
I don't know. Maybe he made the silence.
Okay. Starring Louis Wolheim as Corporal Stanislaus Kat Kaczynski, Lou Ayres as Paul Bäumer, John Ray as Himmelstoss, Arnold Lucy as Professor Kantorek, Ben Alexander as Franz Kemmerich, Scott Kulk as Lear, Owen Davis Jr. as Peter, Walter Brown Rogers as Bane, William Bakewell as Albert Kropp, Russell Gleason as Muller, Richard Alexander as High Vesthouse, or I guess maybe Vestus. We'll try that. Harold Goodwin as Dietering. I know I'm butchering the hell out of some of these, but I'm trying. And Slim Somerville as Tjaden, which is, I tried to look up the pronunciation of that ahead of time to practice a little bit. Next week's going to be much harder when we do Pedro Panchali. Regardless, we had to bring in somebody who would make fun of all of my pronunciations, somebody who thinks they know German, my little sister, our returning celebrity guest, making her 9th appearance on the show to date. Please welcome back, Sarah Duncan.
Hello, everybody. Good to be back, and I don't just pretend to know German. My grammar might not be that great, but my pronunciation has always been my best.
Well, we do have somebody who is a transplant German that is in the audience regularly for us, so I'll let her know what she thinks of your skills after the evening. But anyway, tonight, with All Quiet on the Western Front, what other war films do you see in this movie, other than the obvious 2022 version that was updated of this movie that was a Best Picture nominee and one foreign language film? What other war films can you really see at this being kind of an influence for?
The Sands of Iwo Jima, Saving Private Ryan.
That was
I see a lot. Yeah, the opening battle scene I see a lot of Saving Private Ryan on the beach, the brutality and the grotesque nature of war.
I was also thinking Hacksaw Ridge for that.
The other one that I know this is a direct influence on, because I think he's had this on a list of his top 10, 15, 20 films. It's Christopher Nolan. He directly ripped part of this off for Dunkirk.
Well, and I would like to point out, too, that I got at several moments the way that this is shot and talked about is almost direct, like pulled, for lack of a better term, from Homer. So, and with the Odyssey coming out, I can see that might be an influence as well.
Well, funny you should say that, and you're preempting my Did You Know section, but we'll throw it in here. The Greek writing on the blackboard in the schoolroom is the beginning of Homer's Odyssey. Tell me, O muse, of that ingenious hero who traveled far and wide. Now, did you actually know that, or was that just irony?
It's actually just irony.
I figured.
But, you know, it is a great story that talks about a lot of the same things as this film. War, trauma, trying to deal with the pain of peace and death and this delicate balance. And it's why Homer's works have stood the test of time kind of in the same way as this film. So, I mean, this has been remade 3 times, so obviously it's speaking to someone.
Quick background for the movie. All Quiet on the Western Front was released on April 21st, 1930. On a rough budget of $1.25 million, All Quiet would make an estimated $3 million at the worldwide box office. The film was met with significant critical praise at the time and would be nominated for 4 Oscars at the 3rd Academy Awards, including Best Writing and Best Cinematography for Arthur Edeson, winning Best Picture and Best Director for Lewis Milestone. The film has since been recognized by the AFI on the following lists: 100 Years, 100 Movies in 1998 at number 54, 100 Years, 100 Thrills, it was a nominated film, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes, and Our Bodies Are Earth and Our Thoughts Are Clay and We Sleep and Eat with Death was a nominated quote. 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition from 2007, it was a nominated film. AFI's 10 Top 10, it was the number 7 epic film. In 1990, it was selected and preserved by the United States Library of Congress's National Film Registry. A sequel to the film, The Road Back from 1937, portrays troops from 2nd Company returning home after the end of World War I. All Quiet on the Western Front currently holds a 98% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 91 score on Metacritic, and a 4.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, Dad, what is your relationship to this movie?
This is the first time I've seen it. I knew it existed. I had never had even an opportunity to see it before. So
I find that hard to believe. You've had a lot of opportunities to see it. It's just not one that you've put on. However,
correct.
I did know that you knew of this movie because during our 2022 Oscar season, I specifically said this version is the better version of the two. There are parts of the newer updated version that I enjoyed and I thought hit home a little bit harder. Obviously, they were working with modern technology. Edward Berger could put a lot more of the intense nature of battle into it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of criticisms of that movie, particularly trying to throw in the peace negotiation part of it with Daniel Bruhl in over the top of it. Because to me, the reason why this movie is better, not just from the respect I have for what they accomplished, given that this is 2 years after we started talking films, or yes. I guess 3 is 27 was the Jazz Singer.
Yeah.
But they are doing this with a emphasis specifically on the lives of the soldiers. And the minute that they cut away and started looking at the geopolitics overall and made it much more sympathetic to the German cause, like, I understand what Edward Berger was trying to do as the film entry for Germany that year, but let's just be honest. The book and the movie have always been about the soldier and not about the country.
I understand your points. I didn't think that the film did have flaws. I thought the cinematography was brilliant, and I had even said that when I walked out and talked to you afterwards, that I thought it would get nominated for best cinematography because of the shots.
You said it was going to win for it, and I will give you credit. You called that one because it did win.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was beautifully shot, and I stand by that.
Yes. I'll give that credit. I think one of my other big criticisms was the score in that one, just because also I'm so used to the non-score in this movie.
Now, I understand your criticisms of it. I understand also, I think that it wasn't really meant to be a geopolitical as much as it was just the folly, because I think the last part just shows how the soldiers are nothing more than pawns in a political game that's has nothing to do with the actual lives of the people of the country. They're just vessels. You don't put any stock in the real soldier fighting the battle. What you're doing is he's just a pawn that you sacrifice in order to achieve your socioeconomic advantages. And that was what Berger, I thought, was trying to say by the last portion of the film that was added.
I do appreciate that he tacked on at the end, and I think it makes maybe a larger impact to me the final battle sequence of the new film or the updated version. Maybe a little bit more than the ending to this one, even though the ending to this is very iconic. But I think you can still get there without having all of the other things that were added into it, and frankly made it a longer movie. Sarah, do you remember your relationship with this movie?
I do, actually. I first watched this in college on a project that I was doing for my Greek mythology class, actually. Our professor.
That is not my recollection of it, because I remember you saying I'd never seen it before when I put it on during the pandemic, because this was one of the few at the tail end of me crossing off Best Picture winners and AFI Top 100.
I don't think we watched this one together, Tom. I know that we watched the 2022 one together.
I don't remember watching that with you because I was living in Madison by that point.
I remember watching it. I swear that I remember watching it with you and Dad.
Okay. Well, I didn't watch it with Dad. I watched it on my own.
Okay, so then maybe it was just Dad. But I know that this is not one that I think we watched together, because this was part of the project where for 24 hours I had to binge war movies because I was doing a paper about the glorification of war in Hollywood cinema.
Mm.
And it becomes very easy to lose your faith in humanity after about 24 hours of nothing but brutal war films.
It depends on the war films that you're watching. If you're watching some of the old John Wayne, everything is heroic and we're the good guys in everything that we do and we're fighting all of the bad evil guys, that doesn't really lose your faith in humanity so much as Platoon.
Yeah,
Apocalypse Now.
I watched Apocalypse Now. I watched Saving Private Ryan. I watched Hacksaw Ridge. I watched Unbroken, like back to back to back for hours. And I remember this one was kind of shoved into the middle of the pack. And I remember just sitting, because the cinema and how this whole film was shot was so different to everything I had just seen. It almost took me aback. And so I don't know. I just remember it resonating with me differently than the other ones, because this was the first time I had seen it. Partly it was so much older than everything. And yes, you're talking about individual lives in all of these movies and everything else, but this one is taking the point of view of, for lack of a better term, the mud soldiers. And it's this idea of every man. I mean, you even see it in a scene where Paul is in that shell hole with the French soldier talking, you were just a man like me. It's very much this idea of being one-on-one, of you and I are the same, which you don't get in every single type of war movie. And so it leaves more of a lasting impression. And it did for me. I've liked this movie for a long time.
So, Dad, this being your first time with the film, did you like it?
Yes, I enjoyed it. I was surprised for 1930 how well it was shot and done. I think it was clearly ahead of its time and kind of set a tone for what 1930s Hollywood was going to be.
I would say it may rival the budget and production value of everything in that decade, save for The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Those are the only two that I can think of that have higher production values that immediately spring to mind.
In both of those, the studio spent astronomical amounts of money to produce.
Yeah. So, Dad, do you have a plot summary ready for us?
I do. All Quiet on the Western Front follows Paul.
I believe it's Bäumer.
Is that correct, Sarah?
Because it's got the umlaut.
I would say it's...
Umlaut just makes like a longer, more pronounced version of the vowel.
So I did look up the pronunciation. It is Bäumer.
Okay. All right. All Quiet on the Western Front follows Paul Bäumer, a young German soldier swept up by patriotic fervor and the persuasive speeches of their teacher, who enlists his schoolmates during World War I. Initially eager for glory, Paul soon confronts the grim realities of trench warfare: mud, hunger, fear, and the constant presence of death. The brutality of combat strips away his youthful ideals, replacing them with disillusionment and a desperate will to survive. Alienated from citizens who cannot comprehend his experiences, Paul finds his only solace in the fragile camaraderie of his fellow soldiers. The film ends with a moment of tragic irony. Just as he reaches for the simple beauty of a butterfly in the battlefield, Paul is shot and killed, on a day so quiet that the official report reads, "All quiet on the Western Front."
Thank you. So what is this movie about?
Disillusionment of war. The fact that there's so much fervor building up to war, and then the actual people who serve in it understand that it is not some patriotic event. It's not some glorious aspect, some great undertaking, but a dirty, nasty, deadly experience that alters all who participate in it, either by death or by tragedy.
This is the anti-military recruiting tool. Because if you use what's actually contained within this film, no one would ever want to sign up for war. And that's really, to me, the point of the book. It's the point of the movie. It's the point of the remake, that there's a cost to the individual person who has to fight and die on behalf of their country. There is a noble nature to how we've looked at World War II as we were fighting fascism. Yet I don't think that we ever, until probably Saving Private Ryan and The Thin Red Line came out in the same year, evaluated the total cost to individuals that it took to defend basically the free world against fascism. And in an era where we have made it no secret on this show that we are anti-fascists and not fans of our current governmental leadership, a seeming authoritarian bent that places emphasis on power and aggression and uses people in their wars of attrition like fodder, to me strikes home that this film is still as relevant as when it was made. So, with that, is this the best war film ever made?
If you're trying to establish that war films are about capturing the emotional essence of what is it like to be in war, maybe. If it's just a pure film about war itself, I'm not sure. I mean, it is really an anti-war film. And if that's the point you're trying to make, there are times when war, even bloody and horrible and terrible as it is necessary for certain achievements. There is no alternative. And so you could look at certain films, and I would point to something like Glory, because it's talking about ending slavery in the United States. So for what it was saying, yes. I'm just not sure over all broad categories of war films.
I think because of its age, it suffers from the standpoint that it's just not as technically savvy as some of the other ones in recent history that have been made. On a technological basis, the ability to place you in the capacity of war. Give me Dunkirk, give me 1917, give me Saving Private Ryan. Much better made films in their completion. What I will give this credit for is I think it is possibly, if not completely outright, the most important war film that has ever been made.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think it was truly one of the first great films. I mean, this comes out at, as we were talking about before, it's 1930. There has not been any of those big blockbusters yet, but this film continues to crop up in the memory of not just Americans, but like multiple other nationalities throughout the next decade. And that's a really pressing time in the United States because this was a very anti-war film, and we're trying to keep ourselves out or having this larger discussion in the 30s all about whether or not we're going to enter World War II. And I think it had a great impact on people as they're coming to terms with, are we going to remain isolationist or are we going to join this? And I see, you know, even in when you're talking about film history and its impact on people, it is something that is referenced.
I think part of the fact that this film was banned in not just like Germany, but a lot of different countries during the course of the next couple of decades. I think it was not able to be shown in France until like 1963, 64. And Australia, in certain parts of it, it was banned until the 80s. Speaks to the nature at which this film was counteracting certain messages that the government wanted to portray. Dad, you and I went through prep for the year of 1942 for the Revisionist Almanac last year.
Yes.
And the amount of propaganda war films from that year. We're not just talking Mrs. Miniver, but just run through the list of anything we covered in that show. And I know it's probably one of the least downloaded episodes that Andrew's ever done because nobody cares about 1942, but it was actually a fun year, even if it was quite quaint, to kind of get this historical record of what was happening in that moment. But those are all very, very pro-war films and trying to get an American attention span that needed to support the war effort in a collective way that I don't think today that we could do. Like, we cannot do major projects like that in the United States because we are not all pulling in the same way. We are so deeply divided that I venture to think what it would take, what kind of event it would take for us to unify solidly behind an effort that was necessary to pull in such a direction as to fight fascism in the 40s. But again, I think this is very important because you talk about part of the appeal of this movie is it's pre-code, so they could get away with a lot of the things that their contemporaries a couple of years later could not. The violence that's in this, the technical marvel of the battle scenes to it. There are a lot of things in here that I think are very important for filmmakers that eventually would be portrayed. I've kind of talked about the two main eras of war films, the World War II good versus evil kind of storytelling, and then the Vietnam era stuff where it's much more nuanced, has a lot more caveats. You get Platoon and Apocalypse Now and Hamburger Hill and Full Metal Jacket, etc., etc. And all of these films kind of are on top of each other. Those are much more layered. They don't have necessarily good guys and bad guys. I think that this film has no real good guys and bad guys. It has war is bad, humanity is good. They ne'er shall two mix well together.
And I think that this was a sentiment that was shared at the time that this came out, though. Because, I mean, I know you as well as I have sat in a room with Mrs. Schmitz and read A Farewell to Arms.
I did not.
You never? Okay, well.
I've never read a single Hemingway.
You've never read Hemingway?
That is correct.
Well, a big part of A Farewell to Arms is this anti-war sentiment of, you know, it's brutality for the sake of brutality. It's the same idea. And you see it even pop up in things that you don't even connect with World War I from the same mentality. You can talk about The Hobbit, for God's sakes, because a large part of that was written coming out of this war. It was that same mentality of the hobbits are mud soldiers. They are supposed to portray this idea of these people that endure for the sake of enduring. And I see that reflected personally in Paul, as he continues to push through in this entire period. This is getting to, in my opinion, on the understanding of the silent generation.
If this is your attempt to audition for our Lord of the Rings trilogy back-to-back-to-back episodes next December, you're going to have to talk to Dad about replacing him, because we do have one guest already scheduled, and we have an opening for the other ones, but I think it's going to be a heavily requested guest spot.
I know a lot about the history of the Lord of the Rings and the relationship between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. I've read extensively on both of them, but I can't necessarily speak to the films.
I specifically gave Dad an out if he did not want to discuss them, that he could take that week off and Rob and I could discuss them all basically probably on one day on a Saturday, and we'd be just fine. But he has said he will struggle through them, I think was his direct comment.
I think it would also mean more to you if you, as a fellow lover of history and understanding connection, if I can pass along a book that discusses the World War I and like Tolkien's pulling from his own life experiences into the novels.
Okay.
We'll see.
Did you know? With the loss of limbs and gory deaths shown rather explicitly, this is undoubtedly the most violent American film of its time. This is because the production code was not strictly enforced until 1934, and also because Universal Pictures deemed the subject matter important enough to allow the violence to be seen. The scene where a soldier grabs a strand of barbed wire and then is blown up by an artillery shell, leaving only his hand still grabbing the barbed wire, was told to director Lewis Milestone by a former German soldier working as an extra, who saw that exact thing happen during a French attack on his position during the war. Milestone obviously used it in the film. Did you know? Made for the then considerable sum of $1.25 million, the fact that production began only a few months after the 1929 stock market crash puts into perspective the enormous gamble taken by Universal Pictures in making this film. Did you know? Nazi rabble-rousers stormed screenings of the film in Germany, often releasing rats or stink bombs into the theaters, as the wounds of defeat in the First World War still ran deep. This led to the film ultimately being banned by the Nazi Party. It wouldn't receive proper screenings in Germany until 1956, though it did play to packed houses in 1930 in neighboring Switzerland, France, and the Netherlands, with special trains and buses being laid on to transport Germans to screenings.
Surprises me. The movie was banned before the book?
I think the book was already banned, but again,
The book
I don't...
was banned in 1933.
Well, that's when the Nazis took over, so I don't know. I'm not sure all of the timing of all of this, because the Nazis weren't in power in 1930 yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you know? The iconic final shot was filmed during the editing process. All the actors had left, so that is actually Lewis Milestone's hand that is seen in the final shot. He could have been a hand model.
Yes.
And finally, did you know? Lewis Milestone deliberately made the film without music so as not to take away from the seriousness of the subject. Much to his chagrin, however, some movie theaters added music in of their own choosing, as they weren't used to having films delivered to them without any form of background scoring. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 276th episode, we welcome back five-time club member Peterson W. Hill to discuss Pater Panchali from 1955, celebrating its 70th anniversary. Written and directed by Satyajit Ray, cinematography by Subrata Mitra, music by Ravi Shankar, starring Subir Banerjee, Kani Banerjee, Karunya Banerjee, Uma Desgupta, Chanubali Devi, and Tulsi Chakraborty. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. So, Dad, what do you think Pater Panchali would be about? I guarantee you've probably never heard about it until just now.
No, I have not. And I have no idea.
Good deal, because that's about the same boat I'm in.
Baking a flan.
Is that an Indian dish?
Flan? No,
Yeah.
it's Spanish.
Okay. I was going to say.
It's like custard with caramel sauce on it.
Naan. Is it non-Indian? It's like the
Yes.
bread? Okay, yeah. You could tell how, like, adventurous I am with my cuisine options. Of course, Peterson will be poking fun at me for all of that next week, as well as my lack of pronunciation, just like he did on La Dolce Vita. But anyway, before we get too much further, Sarah, what are you working on and where can people find you?
Still working on my paper. I think that's what I was working on last time when I was here a couple weeks/months ago. And as normal, I am, or you are able to find me on my Instagram at the Nomadic Archaeologist.
Okay. Now, a couple of things to take care of for some housekeeping here. We got a nice message that I almost missed a couple of weeks ago, or about a week ago, I guess, is here. And it was written into the website. So that's part of why, because most of the time I only get solicits from like vendors trying to redo our website again. I don't know why that seems to be the only messages, but we got a very nice message from a fan. Adrian from Toronto, if you are listening, he says, he loves listening. Keep up the great work. Always making me laugh at awkward, funny moments. The show has a great vibe. I've been listening for 2 years. So thank you very much. We are very pleased to have you with us. And frankly, just a blanket thank you to everybody out there. I know that I am probably the world's worst self-promoter. Like, whatever the opposite of P.T. Barnum is, that's who I am. I abhor taking credit for almost anything. I like doing the work and then thinking like you need to give me credit, but the minute that you actually do, I shrivel faster than, well, I'm not even sure. Something.
Seinfeld and Shrinkage?
Sure, I don't know that reference, but that's okay. Regardless, we're so far on pace to blow past our best ever month of downloads for the show. We're almost to the point where we may be in line to double what we did for output last month. And we're about to pass the 40K, in fact, by the time this comes out, but 40K career downloads mark. So we do, I want to say thank you to everybody out there who's been with us. I know there have been people over the years that have specifically reached out to us that are regular listeners. We've had some very interesting interactions out of the blue. I know one of our former appellate referral services or the local council in West Virginia had a secretary once that wanted to talk to Dad completely out of the blue because they were listening to our show. Dad's had people reach out to him. I think there was a principal from California that you were in.
I'm in regular contact with him yet.
Okay. We obviously have our super fan from Australia. And so we're very touched anytime anybody thinks well of us enough to send in these messages. They do mean the world to us because this was just a project to do with you, Dad, many years ago. And I feel very honored to be able to continue to do this and have fun. But it's always been a hobby. This is never something that we really wanted to, or at least that I've cared about monetizing. That's not the goal of what this show is. It's just a way to spend time with you, with some of our other good friends. We've made a very good community. I think we have some exciting things coming up in about 2 weeks. We will be announcing specifically what we've been teasing for several months now, this big project that we have going on with our Cinepodcaster group or our community that we've been a part of. I won't say we foster. We're one of the tag-alongs that's riding some coattails, definitely. We're not one of the people that is leading the band. But in this particular instance, this project is, most specifically, it was your idea, but I've helped carry the execution on this.
Yes.
And we're very excited, very proud to be able to bring that to you with the official announcement in about 2 weeks. And then we're going to have more stuff throughout the fall into the end of the year as we kind of move forward. That's going to be all about this project. So we hope you will stay tuned with us for all of that and everything that's to come. Again, thank you, at least from me, but I'm pretty sure also from my dad for everything that we've been able to have this weekend and such. It's been very rewarding to see what we're potentially on the verge of.
Yes, I concur totally. And we do really appreciate when people do reach out to us and let us know they're listening. Sometimes it feels like we're talking and we have no idea if anybody's actually listening to the show. We see downloads, but the input does give us some feedback. So if you do have some comments, I respond. I'm pretty sure you respond, Tom. We'll be glad to talk to you. I mean, if you have suggestions or things you'd like to do, feel free to contact us.
And if you do, just leave us your email address or some way to contact you. Unfortunately, and part of the reason I'm shouting out Adrian from Toronto right now is that he didn't leave his contact information, so I couldn't respond in a different way. But assuming he's listening to the show this evening, then he will hopefully hear that. But yes, I would love to respond to you and just thank you for listening to the show and keeping up with us for as long as you have. I know that in an economy bent on finding people's attention, to be able to take a long form podcast such as this, which is just two schmoes from Wisconsin who may or may not be overly educated and one who can't handle anything abstract. One of them is not me. We very much appreciate anybody who's been willingly sticking it out with us and through all of our foibles and whatnot. So, all right, with that, let's change topics to our next housekeeping matter. We have our August GMOAT Hall of Fame. So, currently, as it stands from last month, we put in 2 people into our Hall of Fame, our 4th director in Christopher Nolan, and our 7th actor in John Ratzenberger. But for this evening, I have 2 nominees available and waiting for us. So I went down a few different rabbit holes after some ideas crept up from listening to a few of our friend podcasts, particularly the episode of The Great Ziegfeld from Best Picture Cast that I was a guest on. That gave me an idea for someone to look up, but sent me down several different rabbit holes in the same vein, which is some of these people from older Hollywood that worked on like hundreds of movies, basically doing costume design, art direction, etc. And so I have 2 people for your consideration. Which would you like first? I have a composer, and I have our first nominee in the category, a new category, of editor.
Let's do the editor first.
All right. For your consideration, someone who has clearly worked on a lot of Steven Spielberg's movies. He is nominated for Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, and Saving Private Ryan. I have editor Michael Kahn.
Okay.
Given the placement of several of these movies within our current top 20, I would have a hard time not using a veto and saying, yeah, he should be in.
I know. Was just going through in my head the editing for each of those films, and I think they're spectacular as far as editing.
Saving Private Ryan, Jurassic Park, and Raiders specifically, I will say, are some of the best edited movies. Raiders, to get it down to that 10-minute concept, every 10 minutes there's going to be a set piece action piece. And while that takes a lot of the writing from Kasdan and the direction from Spielberg, in essence, you still have to edit it to get it to where it's supposed to be. So all of those are particularly enjoyable films. I would have a difficult time keeping him out.
Correct. I would say yes.
So we won't even turn to Sarah for an extra tiebreaker vote or anything. He is our first entry in the category of editor. All right. Then we have another composer. This would be, I believe, our 4th one? 5th one? Let's see here. Yeah, 4th one. Behind John Williams, obvious, Dmitry Tiomkin, and Bernard Herrmann. I give you someone who has worked on Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, Rear Window, Mr. Roberts, and The Philadelphia Story. He has a couple of other movies we will be discussing next year, but I give you Franz Waxman.
Ooh, yeah. I had not even thought about him.
I told you, I went down some interesting rabbit holes with some of these older movies where people were working on them. I just pulling the red strings together to find people who had worked on a bunch of just random different movies.
I think yes.
I figured you'd say that. We've rarely said no to anybody. I think the only 2 people we've voted down are Harvey Weinstein so far for obvious reasons. And you voted down Carrie Fisher.
What?
And we still don't have an actress.
I give you so much smack for that.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, we still don't have an actress nominated to fill that slot. So there's nobody in the actress category of the Hall of Fame currently.
We have one actress with 3.
It's 5.
I know. We have 3. Let's see. Does she have a 4th?
Okay, so the closest we have right now is Julia Roberts with 4.
I think we only have 3 with Katharine Hepburn. Philadelphia Story, bringing up baby, and guess who's coming to dinner?
You're putting me on the spot, so this is terrible podcasting, but give me a second here. That looks to be correct. I do not recall her in any other movie that we've done to this point, but I'll have to add her to the overall list. But I have a couple of other ones that if the movies hit right, we have at least one other actress with 3, and I think we could get to 5 on several of them because they have some bigger movies that we have yet to cover. But I will save those for some eventualities. But anyway. All right, so to put a capper on this month then, we have inducted 2 more people into the GMOAT Hall of Fame. So for the class of August 2025, Franz Waxman as a composer and editor Michael Kahn. So there we go. All right, moving on. We left off at best performance. Dad, who do you have down?
Ayres. I think his performance was by far the best, or the one that carried the film. It was close between that and who I have as the secondary, which I'll give in a minute, but I think his ability to go between, the doe-eyed idealist to the disenchanted veteran during the film was a decent acting job, especially for film at that time, where for whatever reason they had a tendency to overplay their acting.
I think it's still somewhat of a remnant of the silent era where everything had to be overacted. And so then just adding in dialogue on top of that seemed natural to that acting style. I do think he has some moments where it's like awfully played up, and there are some things to me that fall flat, such as the scene immediately following where he's in the blast hole with the French soldier, and
Yes.
he's talking about killing him, and he seems to like get over the fact that he killed another man really quickly. It's just like in a modern movie, that would be a much heavier scene, and it seems like he just gets over it somehow. But that being said, he creates a very sympathetic lead character to follow through the course of the movie that I think he does a good job. I didn't give him my best performance because I do think there are some different caveats to that character and some things I can nitpick with his performance comparative to some others. I ended up giving him most charismatic as part of that because I think you have to put yourself in his shoes for this movie to really work with you. But by the same token, I don't think his performance is necessarily the thing that draws me to this film or that makes me think it's as important as I get from Lewis Milestone putting in all of the battle sequences, stringing this together, making sure it's matching what the production value is, but also taking advantage of the fact that it's such a serious subject, didn't do the music over the top to try and cheapen it, and did the production value well. Because with a high budget, you could certainly waste it in ways. I don't think he really wasted it in making this film.
Well, he was my secondary. And the reason is that if you just take Ayres' performance out, it becomes less personal as far as, the disenchantment of war. I think you needed that vehicle in order to convey the message that Milestone was trying to convey in the film.
Sarah, who was your best performance?
I had Louis Wolheim as Cat. I think his performance was very impactful. I think that he as the mentor of Paul, he plays a very important role, and I think that scene, his death, is so important to the overall story. And when Paul comes back to the front and he's one of the only ones left, and they, embrace. It's this moment of camaraderie, and it's also seeing, you know, all of these new fresh faces and having that kind of, he does a beautiful job of conveying that they're in this together, and also kind of that same disillusioned veteran together now, when at the start of the movie we see Paul and his friends entering the first time as these fresh-faced kids, and they come back for that. And I think without Kat's role, this movie is very, very different. And I think without this actor playing that character, this movie is different through his mannerisms, through the message that he portrays, and without his guidance and the way that he is pushing the narrative, I think, forward in scenes where they're talking about specifically, you know, what is war and how does it start, and all of these like great scenes. He is one of the most important characters in there, and I think he does a good job.
I will compare him, or at least the character, to two other franchise films, but specifically, I think he's meant to portray kind of this Western model of the father figure, that usually the hero goes through this with somebody like as their mentor. So the two that spring to mind immediately are Obi-Wan Kenobi and Gandalf. They're the father figures who, at the beginning of this journey or whatnot, die off at the end of this first chapter. And while they've kind of led and guided you into a particular realm, when their death happens, you feel a definite sense of loss. In this movie, I think it plays out differently, whereas the hero doesn't really continue on, because that's not what the message of the movie is. You know that his eventual demise is just always around the corner, but this signifies that no one is immune from everything that happens. Not even any of his fellow classmates, and certainly not the guys who try to lead him through it. So since Dad gave his best secondary performance, mine here is Arthur Edeson for the cinematography. I agree with Dad that I think that there's an outstanding job to this, both from a technical aspect, but we didn't have a visual effects award until, I want to say, like the 80s. So I think they're doing a lot with very little. So you could also say maybe the editor on this, but it's not just Lewis Milestone. I think the way this movie looks and is shot is very significant to how the movie is portrayed and comes about. Particularly the scenes in motion and those on the battlefield. When they're in the barracks, you're also in kind of a confined space. And so the way that that's even shot creates a certain camaraderie that I don't think is there without somebody, a steady hand, knowing what they are trying to convey through emotion and the visual image. Probably that comes from a era where the visual image was much more important than the spoken dialogue of the silent era.
Actually had Arthur Edeson as well for my secondary. He was very close to my primary. And I think in large, it's because he conveys emotion through his shots very, very well. You know, when you're in the barracks, you feel the claustrophobia almost of all the men on top of each other. And as he sweeps through the trenches, you get to feel all of these men in a panic and a rush. And just the way that it sets up everything, I think it gives you these beautiful scenes that really portray the brutality of what this event was, and just these panoramic shots, and especially for the time frame of how difficult some of these things were to film and to create. I think he did a lot with what he was able to, or what he was given.
One of the most influential things I think about this film is the specific moments where they're charging forward and you see them running and then shells start to explode around them. That's not something that I remember seeing in another film of this ilk until probably the mid to late 40s, if not a little bit later than that. So this is probably a decade ahead of some of its contemporaries. And to me, that is laid right at the feet of both of its director and its cinematographer.
I'd have to agree. I can't, I'm just trying to run through.
Because even the ones from like 1942 that we had,
No,
I don't remember
No.
those specifically having this level of production value to them.
no, they did not. They did not show war. I mean, the American government controlled.
Well, Wake Island had some battle sequences to it, but I just don't think it was quite on this level of production value.
It was not until January of 1943 that the U.S. or the War Department allowed Life magazine to show photos of dead Americans on the shore in Africa after Operation Torch. The first actual footage of warfare was when John Ford came back with his film from Midway.
All right, so I gave my charismatic. Sarah, what did you have for most charismatic?
I had Lew Ayres. I don't think the movie is what it is without him, and he does a good job of pulling you in as you're supposed to. In films like this, he is the everyman. He makes you see it's you're supposed to kind of see yourself in him. And I think he does a good job of that. And I think that you get to come along with him and experience, partly due to the cinematography, all these different moments that really shape who he becomes throughout this film.
What did you have, Dad?
I had Lewis Wolheim. I thought he was the comic relief. I thought he was the guy that kind of kept the film interesting, kind of the sage character. Before this, he had been in a few films and on Broadway as a heavy. So this was the first time he had been like non-gangster, non-henchman. And I thought it kind of opened up his artistic palette to show that he had more ability than what he had been limited to because of his looks.
The way he's introduced is very reminiscent of kind of gangster henchman characters of the time. But yes, he definitely does break out of that, even from the point of where he's immediately introduced, which is him pulling the fast one on taking the pig. I think already signifies what his comedic approach is to the film, so that it's not just mired in this heaviness at all times. All right, let's go to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here, and this movie is kind of told almost because I would imagine the adaptation from the book to the movie, it's somewhat in chapters. The editing seems to like very much close on one scene and then move on to the next. Almost similarly to how a play is done, because you have to change sets. This takes place like in one setting and then it moves to the next setting and then the next setting and the next setting. Part of that is probably the production value of its time. And so I'm definitely not holding that against the film, but because of that, I think there's probably a good 20 to 25 scenes. And now, to be fair, this movie is actually longer in its original released form than the version that we probably all watched, which is the revised version that I think is currently on the Criterion Collection. But that one's probably missing like a half an hour of the original film. Regardless, here are my 5 nominees. I have the opening teacher's persuasion. Then I have the first battle scene, which is the one where the guy gets blown up and the hands are still grasping the barbed wire. I have the scene in the blast hole, which is the one Sarah has mentioned prior, with him talking to the French soldier as he's dying. Then I have the hospital, which is an extended sequence. There's multiple scenes in that, but I'll take that as a whole. It's probably a good 15 minutes of the movie. And then finally, I have his returning to school. Now, there are plenty other ones you could nominate, but do you guys specifically want to highlight any that I did not include?
Cat's death.
Okay.
Especially, I would like to point out the fact that as he's realizing, that Kat's dead and he brought the body back, that the medics are just sitting around.
Okay. I have one, and I did not watch the same version you did. I ended up watching the one on Tubi.
Which is the same one I did. That's the revised version.
Okay. Well, I have the French Girls.
Okay.
And I have that for a very specific reason, because that's going to be my favorite scene. And I'll get to that when we get to that point.
All right. So, taking those into account here, we have Teacher's Persuasion, First Battle Scene, In the Blast Hole, French Girls, Hospital, Returning to School, and Kat's Death. What is the best scene?
I think it's Returning to School.
I think you're probably right.
I think it's the scene that kind of gets to the heart of what they're trying to do with this film and talk about that. I mean, the language he uses, the teacher being in opposition, the students calling him a coward, and him just trying to get his message across of this is what I've seen, this is what I've experienced, and it's very different to this washed idea of what war should be.
I'm not sure that everyone has the privilege that I do to have taken a World War I class, and so this scene, in concert with the opening scene with the professor specifically saying you are the great new generation and such, has the benefit of the historical context associated with this, because I took a specific class on World War I, just on World War I itself. So the period of time from 1914 until basically the Treaty of Versailles in, I think, 1919.
1920, actually.
Was it 1920?
When it was finally completed.
Yeah. Where we had such additional things on top of this. I think we took at least a week or two talking about how, at least in 1914, everybody saw this war as likely to be one similar to the 1871 Franco-Prussian War that was over in like 3 months. And so that's why they're all talking about, we're going to be done by the end of the year. Nobody foresaw that it was going to be this mix of different battle tactics and some of the newest technological advances that would make the war at a standstill for as long as it went on, and basically became just a war of attrition. And so what the teacher's trying to convey at the beginning of the movie that bookends at the end to the returning to school portion of it is probably very reminiscent of the context of the time. He is the mouthpiece for what the countries that were involved, especially at the outset, felt this war was going to be. It's going to be a glorious war. We're all going to get involved, and then it'll be over soon, and the winner will have this great moment that'll all be celebrated as heroes, and we're all going to come home, and it's going to be great. And then you get the reality of the harshness of what the war actually was, and that's coming face to face with the people who haven't lived it. So I think, for me, the reason I would pick it is not just what it potentially signifies, but in the measure of context that I have for this time period, for the historical meaning of everything that was going into it, and the bookend from the beginning to the end. I think that is supposed to be the most impactful scene, even though you have Kat's death and then eventually Paul's death following that.
I'd like to add to that, too, that in this, you get to see the typical German mentality of what it meant at that point in time to be a good German citizen and a good German man. I've spent at length talking about German politics and German body politics, more specifically, even pre-World War I, that kind of led into this idea of later fascism into the 30s. And you already see that whole mentality of what it meant to be a good man kind of come up in the 1870s. Of there were very strict ideas of that, and his idea of this Iron Man, for lack of a better term
Well, you could use Ubermensch.
is speaking directly, I think, to the heart of this mentality of we're good German men, so we're going to go and defeat them because we're the best and we have, the strength that no one else has, and all of this at that point in time.
Master Aryans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I actually have a different best scene.
Okay.
I have In the Blast Hole. And this is ultimately where the rest of the film matters, which is it's not just the disillusionment of war, it's the realization that your enemy is not really your enemy. They're just another human being with a family and a wife and a child, as a picture shows when he goes through his pocket. And that if they weren't at war, maybe they'd be friends. They may sit down and have a coffee together at a cafe and talk about the weather and life and such. And I think it's at that point in time you realize that he realizes that war is not just, this great, heroic, patriotic effort, but it's two human beings pitted against each other for something that really dehumanizes them. And that's where the rest of the film takes place from there, is when he comes to that conclusion that clearly they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and really neither of it matters because they're both going to end up suffering and dying and having problems. They're going to lose family, they're going to lose loved ones. It's a tragedy, and they're both stuck in this mess.
So you said you had your favorite scene as the French girls. Why?
Because when you're in stress, when you're in those moments of where you don't know what tomorrow will bring,
You need some sexual healing, baby.
it has nothing to do with the sex. Marvin Gaye, thank you.
Yeah, that was
Anyway.
a terrible tone-deaf version, but yeah.
I understand. I mean, it was the Wisconsin white boy version.
Sure.
Anyway.
It didn't matter where from white boy was enough.
Yeah. Anyway, it was more about just the human connection. It's somebody understanding that you needed to have some sort of emotional bond, even if it was just for a night, that brought you together and made you feel human again because of the dehumanization of war. So that's why I thought that the scene, I thought originally it was just attempt at a little bit of, sexualization or whatever. And then I watched it and I saw the tenderness he was showing to her and how they came out afterwards. And I came to the conclusion, no, this was not about sex. This was not about prurient interest of the film or trying to spice it up. This was more about showing that they were trying to overcome the dehumanization of war. And so I thought that had a very tender moment and really was much more impactful to me than than a lot of the film. And so that's why I picked it as my favorite.
I mean, I had In the Blast Hole for many of the same reasons you nominated for best scene.
I did too.
As far as most indelible, though, that to me again is Returning to School.
I agree.
I think it's the one that sticks with you the most. It's partly because that's, again, it's the one that's supposed to stick with you. So they wrote it in opposition to everything they started the film with.
Well, yeah, it's supposed to be a bookend. In writing, an illusion at an earlier time that you come back to is actually usually a good sign of writing, because there are films where they introduce plot lines that they never finish, such as the weird cancer diagnosis in The Room that is there and introduced and then never followed up on. Oh, hey, Mark. Anyway, that looks like a good spot for our second break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every movie we've ever graded on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 248 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Bobby Whitlock, 77, American singer, songwriter. Bell Bottom Blues, and musician. Derek and the Dominoes, and Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. John Miyahara, 83, American actor, Superstore.
So, Bobby Whitlock, I don't have a huge history with Derek and the Dominoes. I think they're obviously most famous for being the band that I think Eric Clapton was first with. Although
No, he was with Cream first.
Okay, well, all right, fine. But he obviously jumped around from different groups until he eventually went to a solo career. And so I know a few of their songs, but nothing substantial outside of like Layla. And then John Miyahara, it's really only his claim to fame was being the silent judging coworker during Superstore, which is a show that I watched from beginning to end when it was in its original run, but I don't think really anybody else watched it. But regardless, we take a moment of silence here for both of their contributions to the arts with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Okay, let's move to best funniest lines. There really aren't any funny lines in this movie. So I'll open up with the original title card. This story is neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped its shells, were destroyed by the war.
Paul Bäumer, you still think it's beautiful to die for your country? The first bombardment taught us better. When it comes to dying for your country, it's better not to die at all.
I can't listen to that anymore. Paul talking about the shelling.
Tjaden. Me and the Kaiser, we're both fighting. The only difference is the Kaiser isn't here.
Albert Kropp, speaking of school, they never really taught us anything useful, like how to light a cigarette in the wind, or make a fire out of wet wood, or bayonet a man in the belly instead of the ribs where it gets jammed.
Every day a year, and every night a century. Our bodies are earth and our thoughts are clay, and we sleep and eat with death, and we're done for because you can't live that way and keep anything inside you. I shouldn't have come on leave. I'll go back tomorrow. I've got 4 days more, but I can't stand it here. I'll go back tomorrow. I also have the quote, if you just want to cut that, then I guess I can do, you're just like a man, or you're just a man like me, and I killed you.
Paul Bäumer, war isn't the way it looks back here.
Cat, whenever there's a big war coming on, you should rope off a big field and sell tickets.
Tjaden. There used to be some food in the sawdust. Now it's all sawdust.
Tjaden, the replacements are all like that. Not even old enough to carry a pack. All they know how to do is die.
I'm out.
I'm out.
So am I.
All right. So then let's move to the Stanley Rubric. Legacy is up first on this one. Legacy is a measure of the overall legacy as shared between the audience and the industry since the initial 5 years that it came out. So roughly 1935 to today, so the last 90 years. How has this film been perceived, and what is its overall legacy among those two groups? Out of 5 points for each group, adding to a total of 10. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go second.
I think this is a 5 with the industry. I think that the difference between it being in the mid-50s in the original AFI Top 100 and then being completely off the list 10 years later does maybe give you a caveat that maybe it isn't a full 5, but I think this is a celebrated film. The fact that it won Best Picture, I think, is significant because it allows people to be introduced to the film in a way that you may not pay attention to other films. The Oscars does have a way of us remembering films, maybe not always the most useful films, Tom Jones, but at least some. And it gives people a reason to watch them and start podcasts on them. But this is one where I think there's a significant value to having that there. And this is a film that I still would find probably in a lot of film classes, given its significance and its importance generally. I think that it is still influential to directors of war films. Maybe not as an overall sense, but at least within the genre, I think it is a very important film. So I'll start with a 5 there. Now, did you do our poll this week? I think I remember you did our offhand poll. We'll throw it out there because
Yes.
some people are really waiting sometimes to see what our office cohort said.
Yes.
You mind sharing?
Not one person had ever heard of the film, and only 2 people had ever, or excuse me, not one person had seen the film, and only a couple of people have heard of it.
Okay. That's not shocking. For a film from 1930 that I don't think is in front of people, I really would have a hard time thinking that it's something people have gone out of their way to see, even though I believe next year is when the copyright expires, and this could be available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. So with that being said, I would guess that pretty much all of cinephiles have probably seen this movie at one time or another, maybe at least once, and know at least of it. And that was before the remake. So because of that, I'm going to go for a 3 on that side and a total of 8.
Okay. I think you're way too high. I think from the industry's the credence of this is not in the fact that it won the Academy Award, because that's within impact and significance. I don't think people go back that far.
You're
and
misunderstanding the argument. I'm saying the people that are completionists, the people like myself, like Kieran and his show, that go back and do a certain level of completionist to have seen all the Best Picture winners. I think there are a lot of people that have seen this because it won the Oscar. I'm not giving it credit because it won the Oscar in the moment that it was up for one, but rather that people return to it because it's a name on a list that they've crossed off.
Well, I think what I would say is from the industry standpoint, this became a formula or a building block by which a lot of anti-war films were based. So I'm going to give it a 3 for the industry but I think for the most part, the industry has kind of, other than the fact that it's a foundational block, has kind of lost, I think you pointed out, but the fact that it's off of the lists for so many of the different lists. And as far as the industry,
well,
other than cinephiles,
I said it moved off of one list.
Okay. I still stay it's a 3. And for the public, I'm going with a 2. And the only reason I give it a 2 is because 1 for the general public, maybe I'll give it another 1 for the cinephiles, because otherwise no one's heard of this film.
I actually don't think that's true. I think that it's more relevant, or at least more discussed with the general public, around maybe people who have a little bit more background in this, because I brought it up at work this week. Now, I have a kind of smattering of people at my job. Some, we have multiple people in our group who have master's degrees, and we have multiple people who didn't even go to college. So we kind of have this range. But even on my team, there were people that knew what it was about, and we had an actually very interesting conversation about early film, because I said I was coming on to do this. And that being said, even those who we had one person who'd seen it already, we'd had another two who'd seen the remake in 22, and another one who had at least heard of it. And so maybe you're not having exactly the same experience as I did, but I got to have this, what I felt was a very interesting conversation in the middle of a work day, because suddenly I had this point of connection to something that has always interested me with people that were this wide range. That being said, as far as an industry, I have to agree with Tom. This is probably pretty far up there. This is one of the first ones that, when I was studying war, that gets brought up a lot. So this is one that's I've heard a lot about, and it's brought up in the same breath as Metropolis for like historians and people who talk about these early stages of film. So I'm giving this a 4 for industry, and for people I would give it a 3.
I think if you asked many of the directors who have done a epic war film, Sam Mendes, possibly Oliver Stone, although that one might be the one that's grasping at a few different straws. I know Spielberg has talked about it. I know Christopher Nolan has talked about it. They have all used influences of this, despite its age, for what they used to make their own war films. If that's not speaking to a higher industry level, and yes, while I did make a caveat that it did move off of the AFI Top 100, shortly after that, it's number 7 in a list of 10 in the epic film genre. So I don't think that its significance is undercut. In fact, I would say that I'm not sure what it ranked, if anything, on the BFI Sight and Sound list, but you and I obviously have a lot of disagreement with what is on the Sight and Sound poll.
Oh, yeah.
I still think that this is a significant film in the history of cinema. And I think a 3 is drastically low. Now, the other part of this that I will say, and just to caveat, there are people that, I guess, my issue with doing the poll in our office every week is this. How many of the people that we ask in our general staff would you say are cinephiles? The people that watch, let's say, 50 movies a year.
3 or 4.
And there are how many people on staff? Is the 3 or 4 counting you and I?
No.
Okay. But outside of us, how many other people are on staff? It's like 24, 25?
28.
Yeah. So that's not a large dichotomy for where my 3 comes from and derives from. And not that it's 1 point is not a huge difference between the two of us. You have a 2 and I have a 3 on that side. My 3 is only based on that I think I don't want to overweight the people who don't watch a lot of movies, but I also don't want to overweight the people who watch all the movies. So I'm splitting a bit of a difference. The average will take care of it, but I'm just explaining sometimes that I think when I've made this comment and you've tried to rebuke me for trying to criticize you for it, I think you overweight for people sometimes that don't watch a lot of movies, whereas the value of doing that is to note that even the people who don't watch a lot of movies sometimes may have A, heard of it, and B, may have seen a movie that we're discussing that we didn't think would necessarily sink in with the general population. So when we discuss a Toy Story or an Inside Out or something of a more modern era, when we hit some of the people that don't watch a lot of movies, we know that this is much more impactful to get to the 4 or 5, as opposed to that we should take it off for down to a 2. You can stay at your 2 on that one. I have a much bigger disagreement with your industry score than I do your audience score on this one.
Okay. From a public standpoint, one of the factors I take into account is my own, which is if this is not a film that I'm readily familiar with or make a big deal about,
that eliminates a ton of movies that I've introduced to you over the course of the show, like The Third Man, which you loved.
I understand. But again, the fact that I loved it does not mean that it is readily available within the public or that it's perceived and has a legacy within the public.
But we're not talking about all of the public.
We're not?
No, this has never been about the entire public. You get a small swath of it, but it's a weighted public. When we're talking about the people that consume film, again, this is the conversation we've had about my friend Ben. Ben has probably watched 7 movies in his life. He would he would much rather spend his days out in a tree stand than watching, I don't know, The Holy Mountain that I did this last week. Frankly, I think I might have joined him for part of that because that was not the most enjoyable film. It's a great discussion film. But about the point where they boil a piece of shit into quite literal gold, I'm like, what? Yeah, that's only one of the 16 audible what the fuck moments in that movie. Anyway, I won't try and go into the rest of it here. It's an odd film. Anyway, but no, we have a weighted version of this where the people who actually watch it, and again, I don't think you can probably get to a 5 on the audience unless you're picking off some of those people. But I don't think that you can go down to like a 1 unless it's like a deep cut. A lot of cinephiles haven't seen it. And I think because this movie has some name recognition and that it won Best Picture, it's got a little bit more staying power and recognition than we're probably, at least you're giving credit for.
I think for the people who watch movies, it does not have nearly the staying power you're claiming.
Okay. But I think that, Dad, based on the sheer fact alone that you hadn't seen this movie, and that is so shocking to me. How have I seen this when you hadn't? Especially a movie that is kind of, that holds so much import.
There are so many movies that I've introduced to him over the course of the show that I've waited strategically and then put them on the list to make sure that he watches them because I think he would like them. And he just has no idea because he's not as adventuresome in his takes and what he watches. And he retreats to a lot of comfort food. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of people that...
And
it's not a criticism.
I understand. And it's also a fact of time. I mean...
Well, that's true, too. I'll grant you that.
I have a busy life. And I have to try to... there's a lot of years where there's some films that I just can't get to everything. I have to get to more now because we're doing the show and we're trying to do it than some years. Because there's some films that I'm not going to necessarily have a big proclivity towards. And I just go, I don't want to spend the time to do it.
If we weren't doing this project and we weren't doing this podcast, he would have never been introduced to Michael Clayton or There Will Be Blood. He would have been never introduced to Three Idiots. He would have never been introduced to The Third Man. There are just a lot of movies over the course of history that he's not wanted to watch or not had a feeling to that he's been forced into. And part of the joy of doing this show is that I have an excuse to watch stuff that I know I should, but I don't feel like I have the impetus to just do it on my own. But regardless, that is a 6.67 average between the three of us. A horribly low score. All right, impact and significance. Dad, would you like to lead here since you let me go first?
Sure. I think the industry, the fact of its nominations and the Best Picture winning, the Best Director, I'm going with a 4.5, but I could go with a 5 if you could persuade me. And for the public, it was the 3rd or 4th ranked film for box office. I've looked at 3 or 4 different studies and show what they came up with for numbers. I'm going to go with a 4.5 for that too, because it did well in the box office. So I'm at a 9.
Okay, so I don't have much of a different disagreement with you on any of that. I also had a 4.5 for the industry. It just doesn't quite crack my top 5. I know that the Oscars were more limited. We didn't even have supporting categories yet by this point. So it's a little harder to say like it had so many nominations and other things. And I think if it were maybe a decade older, it probably would have had a significant hold of the Oscars in some of the technical categories and some other things that were added later. That being said, I really have a hard time establishing what the box office numbers were back, especially this far. But really, anything before the 70s is so hard to pin down what the actual attitude for certain things was, unless it's like a Gone with the Wind where they've adjusted for inflation and they have some of these numbers and the reporting and some other things that you definitely can put a finger on exactly what the fervor was and the cultural moment when a particular movie came out. This is one, however, given the political attitudes and the fact that how many different countries banned it because of its significance, that I'm going for a full 5 there. So I am just a half point different off of you. I have it at a 9.5.
I didn't think about the banning, so I will go with your 9.5. I'll agree with you.
It wasn't just the banning, it was a touchstone and a reference point for every person who wanted to remain isolationist as we approach the later 30s.
So if you're going to say that this influenced Charles Lindbergh and the isolationist movement, then I'm going back to my 9.
Sarah, just give your number and let's move on.
I will also go with the 9.5.
All right, so that makes the math
Charles
very
Lindbergh,
simple.
Big dick.
Yes. You like simple math.
Yes. So that's a 9.5 between the three of us. All right. Novelty. So I think I will lay down the marker on this one to start. I think this is the most audacious film of its era. And thus, I'm going to go with a full 5 on that one. It's pre-code. It was, unlike many of its contemporaries, it was not subtle with its violence. I mean, it feels a little quaint now based on what we've seen in other war films since. But at the time, it was revolutionary in that regard. So I'll go a 5 there. But on the execution, this is where it's not the fault of the film, but the technology has caught up to it and some of the acting. So I'm just going to nitpick this down just slightly to a 4 because it does have some overacting. It has some kind of like 1930s talking dialogue cliches to it. It does have a little bit of a limitation in kind of its setting and its production value. Again, not the fault of the film, but just some things where I knock it down slightly to a 4. So I have it at a 9 here.
Okay. As far as originality, I think this is incredibly original. Some of the way that this is entirely shot is very new, kind of very, at the time, modern way of looking at a film. Very hard to do. So I'm giving that a 5. As far as execution, I have to dock it just a bit because it hasn't gone over the well as it's aged. I have a problem at times with the image resolution being kind of fuzzy, which to an extent adds to some of the mystique in certain scenes, but it almost feels like it's unfocused and unintentionally unfocused at a moment or two. And yeah, I'm going to go with a 4.5 for that. So a 9.5 overall.
For me, originality, I have a 5 because I just couldn't think of anything that was anywhere close. Execution, I only went down a half a point. I mean, I'm taking into account the fact that this was, 1930. Yes, it's not going to have the same technological advances as we have now, but I think it had a lot for 1930. So I'm at a 9.5.
All right, that's a 9.33 average between the three of us. Classicness. This is basically how well the film has aged or not over the course of time. Given the 95 years that we have here, there's plenty to work with as for how well it's aged, or maybe was ahead of its time. Dad, you usually like to start this category for us.
Yes, we started at 6. And I don't do this very often. I think it was way ahead of its time. I think it was the model that every war film, at least those that felt the war was not glorious and wonderful.
We're not propaganda.
Followed. Yeah. The fact that it portrayed an accurate version of war, what it was to come out of the trenches and what you had to go through. It shot it in a very realistic ability for its time frame. I'm at a 9.5. The only reason I don't give it a complete 10 is because I think it, to some extent, hasn't had as much impact in the last 50 years as it did in the early part. But otherwise, I would say it was a 10. So I'm at a 9.5. I can't think of anything more classic than this, or very few that's more classic than this.
Well, I'll just jump right in and say I actually did put this at a 10, and I think a large part of that is it is something we keep returning to. It's this over and over idea of it's the same idea that keeps getting brought up into everything else we do in this genre. Whether or not we're talking about whether we're focusing more on this everyman idea and being disillusioned by the blood and the gore and the dirt of war and it not being something that's patriotic and beautiful, or whether it is something that they actually are making a little bit of a propaganda about. The cinematography in this and a lot of the things that they chose to show, I think resonated and made an impact on the industry so much that I think it crops up in certain things. Beyond that, this is a film that's been remade twice. It is a book that's still taught in school. It is important, and it hasn't been something that had a large impact at the time, and I think it still has that large impact. I think it just depends on who you're talking to. So I put it at a 10.
Well, that'll make the math really easy because I have this at a 9. I think there are some spots to potentially take some points off just because of the dwindling attention spans. The way this film is set up, and it's a little bit more drawn out, it's a little slower. The pacing isn't as quick. I think you might lose some people. Again, not the people who necessarily watch a ton of films, and especially older films, are going to have a problem with that. But the people that need to be introduced to this movie, I think it may be harder to sell them on that point. Now, normally I reserve some of that for rewatchability, so I'm maybe shading into other territory a little bit here. But I will also say just some of the limitations in filmmaking. The war scenes for me in the remake, as we said early on in this show, are a little bit more impactful because they're able to just be made with the level of technology that's available now. And so while you can marvel at what they were able to accomplish in its time, it's still a limitation of its time, and I think it shows some age spots. That being said, this is subject material that is well ahead of its time. It's grotesque in its shock value. It has at least what I feel is a very worthwhile message that is an advancement. And based on the timelessness factor, I will add 5 points to the 2 that I've already taken away. So if you're doing the math, -2 from 6 Add 5, you get to my 9. So that's going to be a 9.5 average between the three of us. Rewatchability. This is where I think I've really separated myself a little bit. This is, for the most part during the history of the show, been a very subjective category on how rewatchable the film is to you. I've tried to take, at least this season, a more objective tactic to doing this category on how maybe the general audience might pick up this film. The fact that it's slower, the fact that it's more methodical, the fact that it has spots in between the dialogue and is a little bit more visual can be difficult for people. The fact that it's black and white, older, and the filmmaking is not as updated. There's not as much action to it. And also, there are some people that just have trouble with watching war films. I think all of this adds to a 5 for me. Even though I think there are a lot of people that should give this a chance and might enjoy it, it's not as easy as suggestible as 12 Angry Men or Casablanca, that are much easier older films to introduce people on, that are able to hold the attention span a lot more than this movie, which is more abstract and has a few other things going on for it that you need to pay attention to.
Rewatchability for me was kind of a tough one. This is one that, while I enjoy the movie and I think it has a lot to say and it can be very poignant, this is not something that I personally have gone back to rewatch a lot. It can be a tough one at times, and the subject matter is hard. It's hard to get people excited about and introduce them to, especially partly due to its age and the era it's coming from. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to put this at a 6.5.
Okay.
So I'm going to be the high mark. I'm at a 7. I think this is a film that everybody should watch at least once in their life, and I'm going to encourage people to watch it, because if you really want to understand what the ramifications are for war, this film does the best job, or one of the best jobs I've ever seen, of portraying that. It may be almost, or it's 95 years old, but its message is timeless, which is that war should be the last resort, which is where your entire society's waves of life may be altered or destroyed because of some maniacal method or means of another country or dictator. Other than that, war should not be a solution. And I think we're too often the chicken hawks. And I'll be honest, the chicken hawks in the United States are as bad as any. The guys who never served, never put themselves in the line of duty, who are thumping their chests and running out and going, we need to invade here. We need to be doing this. We need to be sending arms here.
Or the ones that think they can negotiate a peace treaty on day 1 of their presidency.
Yeah, well, I'm sure his bone spurs didn't get the fuck in the way of that negotiation at all. You could probably cut that out.
No, I think we'll leave it in.
Yeah. So that's where I am. I would encourage people to watch it. And when I saw it to begin with, I would say, yeah, well, this is good. I enjoyed it, whatever. It's been the last 3 or 4 days since watching it.
So it's a 3-day film?
It's a 3-day film. It's one where I've come to appreciate the message much more than when I originally saw it.
All right. So that is a 6.17 average between the three of us. For audience score on this one, we had a 70% for Google users and an 89% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us a 7.95. So to repeat the categories, we had a 6.67 for Legacy, a 9.5 for Impact and Significance, a 9.33 for Novelty, a 9.5 for Classicness, a 6.17 for rewatchability, and a 7.95 for audience score, giving us a final total of 49.12, and currently placing it on our list at number 83 between Inception and Gladiator.
Okay.
You know, everybody was making those comparisons.
I was just thinking that.
Well, oddly enough, those are all three films we've discussed this season. A little unusual that we've had that. But to also be even fairer, the two films surrounding it are ones we've covered within the last calendar year, because 81 is Ben-Hur and 85 is Roman Holiday. So, if you have any commentary for us, if you just like to describe how Dad looks like Patton Oswalt some more, if you'd like to pass us some great feedback or comments, or you just think we got it plain wrong, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on ronnieduncanstudios.com/GMOAT podcast, or you can find us on any of our socials at GMOAT podcast on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky, or TikTok. Okay. Remaining questions for this one? I don't have any.
Not really.
I think the movie does a very good job of putting a cap on everything you want to know. So, any remaining questions for either of you?
I don't think so. I think it answers and solves all of its own problems.
Okay. So then I would like to thank my little sister for being on with us this week. You will be back with us soon for in exactly 25 episodes on the 300th episode of the show for Buster Keaton's The General. But until then, go ahead and remind the people again what you're working on and where they can find you.
I am currently writing a paper on the impact of French cuisine on soul food in the kitchen at Thomas Jefferson's house. And I can be found at the Nomadic Archaeologist on Instagram.
Okay. Dad, any remaining thoughts for the week?
I did post another article on Substack on my rules of life that I gave you kids years ago. I'll be posting another one here shortly. I also am in the process of writing an article that I'm going to give a co-authorship to Sarah on your mother's great uncle who died in Normandy. And I've been researching extensively on that, and I'll be writing an article that I hope to try to submit to one of the World War II magazines for publication. Just a kind of thing that, you know, in this world, that man gave his life to this country to fight fascism, to protect our way of life. And I just felt it was necessary for us to understand what happened to him and the sacrifices he made. And I think this article that I'm working on is going to try to convey that, which is, you know, you really need to dig in if you have relatives that gave the full or the last full measure, as Lincoln said, and understand where they came from. And I say this in part because we're talking about a war film itself. And so I thought it would be a good point to bring this up. If and when that article becomes available, I will obviously probably be publishing it also on my Substack. And I would probably indicate that we'll link my Substack page to our website at some point here shortly.
All right. As for me, I really don't have anything that I can think of. I don't think anybody needs to hear my stream of consciousness about the Holy Mountain. So I think we'll leave it at that for the week and just say, yet again, thank you all very much for the feedback, for the numbers, for following along with us. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit like or subscribe. That would definitely help. Again, I am the world's worst self-promoter, but anything you can do to help us along a little bit would help. But a lot of exciting things yet coming. I am not looking forward to the advent of school here which apparently I already have an assignment, even though school does not technically start till a week from today. I have one due 3 days from now, somehow. So with that...
Should I explain what law school is like?
No, I think everybody's kind of gotten that over the last year.
Well, I could give you the analogy I've used for 35 years.
Yes, the one that yet to this day I have yet to hear anybody disagree with that's been through law school.
Which is, it's like having a root canal through your anus.
Sustained for 3 years.
Yes.
So, with that, thank you all very much for listening. We'll see you next week. Don't be anxious. Whatever God ordains is for the best. Next week, for our 276th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member Peterson W. Hill to discuss Pater Panchali, celebrating its 70th anniversary. Written and directed by Satyajit Ray. Cinematography by Subrata Mitra. Music by Ravi Shankar. Starring Subir Banerjee, Kani Banerjee, Karunya Banerjee, Uma Dasgupta, Chanubala Devi, and Tulsi Chakraborty. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMOAT Podcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan, and our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.